The day that everyone in the village of Umunze had been eagerly anticipating had finally arrived, the day of the competition. From the break of dawn, the entire village buzzed with excitement and anticipation. Every household was alive with activity as mothers and fathers bid their daughters farewell, reminding them of the great honor that could be brought to their family if they performed well. In one house, a mother held her daughter's hands, her voice both stern and loving as she spoke. Amaka, do not bring shame to this family. Remember who you are and where you come from. We are all counting on you. Across the village, similar scenes were playing out in every home. The maidens carefully packed their boxes with their finest clothes, jewelry, and all the essentials they would need during their stay at the palace. Some of the girls were nervous, while others were filled with excitement at the possibility of becoming the prince's bride. It was a day that would change the lives of many, and no one wanted to miss the opportunity. In Nkechi's household, the atmosphere was no different. Ijeoma was busy packing her things, her face set in determination. She carefully selected her best outfits, making sure to include the ones that would show off her beauty. She was certain that she would win the prince's heart, and nothing was going to stand in her way. Ijeoma, make sure you pack everything you need, Auntie Nkechi said, watching her daughter with pride. You must not bring shame to this family. Go and win this competition and make us proud. I will, Nne, Ijeoma replied confidently. She finished packing her things and closed her box with a satisfied smile. While Ijeoma prepared to leave for the palace, Adama was in the corner, quietly doing her chores. She scrubbed the floor with a rag, her heart heavy with sadness. She had dreamed of going to the palace, of participating in the competition, and perhaps even winning the prince's heart. But Auntie Nkechi had forbidden her from going, saying that she was not worthy. Adama tried to focus on her work, but it was difficult. Her heart ached with disappointment, and she felt tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't dare to cry, though, for she knew that it would only anger Auntie Nkechi even more. As Ijeoma finished preparing, she glanced at Adama, a smirk on her face. You should clean up faster, Adama. The competition is starting soon, and you wouldn't want to be caught slacking off. Adama bit her lip, trying to hold back the tears. Yes, Ijeoma, she said quietly, continuing to scrub the floor. With the box packed and ready, Ijeoma left the house without another word, her head held high. She walked with purpose, knowing that she was about to embark on the most important journey of her life. As she walked through the village, she saw other maidens heading towards the palace as well, each one dressed in their finest clothes and carrying their own boxes. Some of them exchanged nervous glances, while others chatted excitedly about what lay ahead. When Ijeoma finally arrived at the palace, she was in shock of the grandness of the building. The palace stood tall and majestic, Its walls adorned with beautiful carvings and decorations that spoke of the rich history of the kingdom. The gates were wide open, and the path leading to the entrance was lined with flowers that filled the air with their sweet fragrance. Ijoma joined the other maidens who had already arrived and were starting to settle down. She placed her box on the ground and looked around, taking in her surroundings. Everything was perfect, and she felt a surge of confidence. This was where she belonged. Ijoma, one of the maidens called out, waving her over. Come and sit with us. Ijoma smiled and walked over to join the group. She felt like a queen already, surrounded by girls who admired her beauty and grace. But just as she was about to sit down, she reached into her pocket to check her phone, only to realize that it wasn't there. Panic flashed across her face as she searched through her belongings. It was nowhere to be found. Oh no, Ijoma muttered under her breath. I must have left it at home. Back at Aunt Nkechi's house, Adama had finished her chores and retreated to her tiny room. It was a small cramped space with barely enough room for her to lie down. She sat on the edge of her thin mattress, staring at the wall in silence. The sadness she had been holding back all morning finally overwhelmed her, and she buried her face in her hands, letting the tears flow freely. As she cried, she couldn't help but imagine what it would be like to be at the palace, dressed in beautiful clothes and surrounded by other maidens. She thought of the competition, of the chance to win the prince's heart and change her life forever. But all that was out of her reach, and the reality of her situation hit her like a crushing weight. Adamma! Aunt Nkechi's voice suddenly rang out from the other room. Adamma quickly wiped her tears and stood up, her heart pounding. She hurried out of her room and went to find her aunt, who was standing in the middle of the living room, looking irritated. Yes, Auntie, Adama said, keeping her eyes on the floor. Ijoma forgot her phone. Aunt Nkechi said, holding up the device. You need to take it to her at the palace. And don't waste time there. Do you hear me? Go straight there and come back immediately, or else you will be punished. Adama nodded quickly, taking the phone from her aunt's hand. Yes, Auntie, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Go on then, Nkechi said, waving her off, and make sure you are back before the sun sets. Without another word, Adama left the house, clutching the phone tightly in her hand. She felt a mix of emotions as she walked towards the palace. She was nervous about going there, but at the same time, she was grateful for the opportunity, even if it was just to deliver a forgotten phone. When she finally reached the palace gate, she hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. The palace was even more magnificent up close, and she felt like she didn't belong there. But she had a job to do, and she knew that she couldn't turn back now. She approached the gatekeeper, a tall, stern-looking man who was standing by the entrance. He glanced at her, his expression hardening as she took in her appearance. Good day, sir, Adama said softly, bowing her head respectfully. My name is Adama. I'm here to deliver my cousin Ijoma's phone. She forgot it at home. The gatekeeper raised an eyebrow, his eyes narrowing as he looked her up and down. He seemed reluctant to let her in, his hand resting on the gate as if he was about to close it in her face. "You say you are here to deliver a phone?" he asked, his tone skeptical. "Yes, sir," Adama replied, her voice steady. "Auntie Nkechi sent me. I promise I won't stay long. I just need to give her the phone and leave." The gatekeeper studied her for a moment, noting her politeness and the respect she had shown him, something the other maidens had not bothered with. He sighed and stepped aside, opening the gate for her. "All right, go in," he said, though his tone was still wary. "But don't cause any trouble." "Thank you, sir," Adama said, bowing her head again before stepping through the gate. As she walked into the palace grounds, Adama couldn't help but marvel at the beauty around. The gardens were lush and vibrant, filled with colorful flowers that seemed to dance in the breeze. The palace itself was even more magnificent up close, with tall pillars and intricate carvings that spoke of its rich history. Adama felt out of place, like a small plain stone among glittering jewels, but she reminded herself that she was here only to deliver a phone and then leave. She had no place in the competition, no matter how much she wished otherwise. As she made her way through the palace, she kept her head down, avoiding the gazes of the other maidens who were already settling in. They were dressed in their finest clothes, their hair styled to perfection, and their faces bright with excitement. Adama felt their eyes on her as she passed, and she heard their whispers, murmurs of curiosity and disdain. She tried to ignore them, focusing instead on finding Ijoma. But just as she rounded a corner, she bumped into someone. She stumbled back, almost dropping the phone in her hand. "I'm so sorry," Adama exclaimed, looking up quickly, her breath caught in her throat when she saw who she had run into. As Adama looked up, her heart skipped a beat. She had just bumped into a tall young man, dressed in the simple clothes of a palace servant. His eyes were kind, and his smile warm, but there was something about him that Adama felt both nervous and comforted at the same time. "I'm so sorry," Adama said again, her voice trembling slightly. She quickly stepped back, bowing her head as she tried to avoid eye contact. "I didn't mean to bump into you. I'm just here to give my cousin her phone. I'll be out of your way as soon as I find her." The young man looked at her curiously, his head tilted to one side. "It's all right," he replied gently, his voice soothing. "No harm done. What's your name?" Adama hesitated, surprised by his kindness. Most people barely noticed her, and when they did, it wasn't to ask for her name. "My name is Adama," she said quietly, still keeping her eyes on the ground. "I'm here to give my cousin Ijoma her phone. She forgot it at home." Prince Uzo, who was in disguise as one of the palace chefs, nodded thoughtfully. He was intrigued by the girl standing before him. Unlike the other maidens who had arrived at the palace, this girl was different. She wasn't dressed in fancy clothes, and she didn't have the same air of confidence or arrogance that the others did. Instead, there was a humility about her that caught his attention. "Adama," Uzo repeated, as if testing how the name sounded on his lips. "It's a beautiful name. Do you know where to find your cousin? Or would you like me to show you the way?" Adama looked up at him for the first time, her eyes wide with surprise. You would help me?" she asked. hardly able to believe that a palace servant, who she assumed he was, would offer to assist someone like her. Uzo smiled and nodded. Of course, I'm more than happy to help. Adama's heart swelled with gratitude. She had expected to be turned away or ignored, but instead, this kind young man was offering to help her. Thank you, she said, her voice full of sincerity. I really appreciate this. Uzo gestured for her to follow him, and together they walked through the palace corridors. As they moved, Adama couldn't help but glance around. The palace was even more beautiful on the inside than it was on the outside. The floors were polished to a shine, and the walls were decorated with tapestries that depicted the history of their land. Adama felt a pang of longing as she looked around. How wonderful it would have been to stay here, to be part of the competition. But she quickly pushed those thoughts away. She was here for a reason, and she couldn't let herself get distracted. As they walked, Uzo couldn't help but notice how Adama's eyes lit up as she looked in her surroundings. There was an innocence and a sense of wonder about her that he found refreshing. It was so different from the attitude of the other girls, who seemed to think that they were already queens. So, Adamma, Uzo said, breaking the silence, why aren't you participating in the competition? You seem like you would be a strong contender. Adamma's face fell at his words. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The thought of participating in the competition was nothing more than a distant dream. I'm not allowed, she said, trying to keep the sadness out of her voice. My auntie said I'm not worthy to join. I'm just here to deliver the phone and then go back home. Uzo frowned slightly, his heart going out to her. Not worthy, he repeated, a hint of disbelief in his voice. Why would anyone say that? Adama shrugged, feeling a lump form in her throat. She didn't want to get into details of how she was treated at home, but it was clear that this young man didn't understand why someone like her would be considered unworthy. It's just the way things are, she said softly, her eyes cast down once more. As they approached, the sound of chatter and laughter filled the air. The girls were busy settling in, arranging their belongings and chatting excitedly about the competition. The atmosphere was vibrant, full of energy and anticipation. When they reached the entrance to the room, Uzo turned to Adamma. This is where the girls are staying, he said. Your cousin should be in here. Would you like me to go in with you? Adamma shook her head quickly, not wanting to cause any more trouble. No, thank you, she said. You have already been so kind. I can manage from here. Uzo smiled at her, nodding in understanding. All right then. I'm sure your cousin will be happy to see you. But remember, if you need any help, don't hesitate to ask. Thank you, Adama said again, her voice full of gratitude. She couldn't believe how kind this young man was. It was as if he could see right through her, past her worn clothes and tired eyes, and into her heart. It made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in a long while. With a deep breath, Adama stepped into the room, clutching the phone in her hand. As she walked in, the chatter among the girls quieted for a moment, and all eyes turned to her. Adama felt a wave of self-consciousness wash over her as she realized how out of place she looked among the finely dressed maidens. But she kept her head high, remembering the kindness of the young man who had helped her. She scanned the room searching for Ijoma, and soon spotted her cousin sitting with a group of girls, laughing and talking as if she didn't have a care in the world. Adama walked over to her, her heart pounding in her chest. Ijoma, she said softly, holding out the phone. You forgot this at home. Ijoma looked up at her, a look of surprise flashing across her face before it was quickly replaced with annoyance. Oh, she said, taking the phone from Adama's hand without so much as a thank you. I didn't even realize I left it behind. Adama nodded, trying to keep her emotions in check. Auntie sent me to bring it to you. I'm supposed to go back home now. Ijoma waved her off dismissively. Well, you have done your job. You can leave now. The other girls around Ijoma snickered, whispering among themselves. Adama could feel their eyes on her, and she knew they were judging her, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she turned to leave, eager to escape the uncomfortable situation. But just as she was about to walk away, she heard someone clear their throat behind her. She turned around and saw Uzo standing at the entrance, watching her with a thoughtful expression. Adama, he called out, his voice cutting through the whispers of the other girls. Would you like to stay for a while and have a drink before you leave? Adama blinked in surprise. Stay? She hadn't expected that. She glanced at Ijoma, who was now staring at Uzo with wide eyes, clearly surprised that he was addressing Adama. I'm not sure. Adama stammered, caught off guard. I'm supposed to go back. Uzo smiled at her, his eyes kind. It won't take long. Just a quick drink before you go. Consider it a small reward for making the trip all the way here. Adama hesitated, feeling torn. She didn't want to disobey Aunty Nkechi, but at the same time, she couldn't deny the kindness that was being offered to her. And for once, she wanted to feel like she belonged, even if it was just for a brief moment. I guess a quick drink wouldn't hurt, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Uzo nodded, pleased with her answers. Great, follow me then. As Adama followed Uzo out of the room, she could feel the eyes of the other girls on her. They were probably wondering why she was being treated so kindly when she clearly didn't belong. But for the first time, Adama didn't care. She was just grateful for this small moment of kindness in a world that had often been so harsh. Adama had never tasted anything as refreshing as the cool drink the palace chef offered her. It was sweet, with a hint of tanginess that lingered on her lip. She took slow sips, feeling the chill travel down her throat, cooling the heat that had built up from her long walk to the palace. She was grateful for the kindness of the chef, unaware that she was in fact sharing a moment with Prince Uzo in disguise. They sat in the kitchen, a space bustling with sounds of clanging pots and the sizzle of food being prepared. The chef, Prince Uzo, kept her company, asking her questions about her life in the village. Adama, shy at first, found herself opening up. She talked about her life with Aunty Nkechi, the chores that never seemed to end, and her dreams of something better, though she didn't dare voice those dreams aloud. The chef listened attentively, his eyes softening with each word. He could see the strength in her, the quiet resilience that she carried like a shield. When she finished her drink, Adama stood up, ready to leave and return to her duties at once. I must go now, she said, placing the empty cup on the table. Thank you for the drink. You are welcome, the chef said with a smile, his eyes twinkling with a kindness that put Adama at ease. Take care on your way home. Adama nodded and made her way to the palace gate. her heart a little lighter after the brief respite. As she reached the gate, a palace guard stepped aside to let her through. Just as she was about to step out, she heard a voice call down from above. "Who is that girl?" the voice asked. Adama looked up, startled to see the king standing on a balcony, his regal figure framed by the ornate carvings of the palace. The guard, who had already started to close the gate, quickly turned to the king and bowed. "Your Majesty, she's not part of the competition," the guard explained. "She only came to return her cousin's phone. She was just leaving." The king frowned slightly, his eyes narrowing as he observed Adama more closely. "She's not part of the competition, you say?" "Yes, Your Majesty," the guard replied. "She only came to do a small errand." The king was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on Adama. Then, to everyone's surprise, he spoke with a commanding tone. "Young girl, come here." Adama hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced at the guard, who nodded for her to approach the king. Gathering her courage, Adama walked slowly back into the palace grounds and looked up at the king. "What is your name?" the king asked, his voice stern but not unkind. "Adama, Your Majesty," she replied, bowing her head in respect. "Adama," the king repeated. "Why are you not part of the competition?" Adama swallowed, unsure of how to answer. "My auntie said I could not participate, Your Majesty." The king raised an eyebrow, clearly displeased with the response. "Nonsense! Every maiden in this village has the right to participate. You will join the competition and you will attend the first meeting with the other maidens, where I will introduce the judges, the prince and the palace staffs." Adama's eyes widened in shock. "But Your Majesty, I cannot," the king cut her off with a wave of his hand. "You will join, and that is final. Now go and prepare yourself." Before Adama could protest further, the king turned and disappeared back into the palace, leaving her standing there stunned. The guard, sensing her hesitation, gently guided her towards the main courtyard where the other maidens were gathering. As Adama entered the courtyard, she felt all eyes on her. The other maidens, dressed in their finest attire, stared at her with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Adama felt out of place, her simple clothes and unkempt hair making her stand out among the others. She felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she kept her head down and followed the guard to her place in the meeting. The courtyard was filled with rows of chairs, all facing a raised platform where the king would address them. Adama found an empty seat at the back and sat down, trying to make herself as small as possible. She could hear the whispers around her, the murmurs of the other maidens as they gossiped about the sudden appearance of this strange girl. "Who is she?" one of them whispered. "Why is she here?" another asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "She looks like she doesn't belong," someone else muttered. Adama bit her lip, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. She didn't want to be here, didn't want to be the center of attention. All she had wanted was to return Ijoma's phone and go back home. But now, she was thrust into a world she didn't understand, surrounded by girls who looked at her as if she were something unpleasant. Suddenly, the murmur of voices quieted as the king entered the courtyard, followed by a group of men and women dressed in fine robes. These were the judges and palace staff who would oversee the competition. Behind them, the prince's friend Obina walked in posing as the prince, his head held high with a regal air. Adama didn't recognize him, of course, and assumed he was the prince everyone was talking about. The king stood on the platform and looked over the gathered maidens. Welcome, all of you, to this important event, he began, his voice carrying across the courtyard. You have all been chosen to participate in a competition that will determine who will become the future queen of this kingdom. The maidens sat up straighter at these words, their excitement palpable. The king introduced the judges one by one, each of them bowing slightly as their names were called. They were important figures in the kingdom, wise, fair, and well respected. Next, the king introduced the palace staff who would assist the maidens during their stay, including the cooks, maids, and tutors who would help them prepare for the various tasks ahead. When it was time to introduce the prince, Obina stepped forward, smiling warmly at the maidens. I look forward to getting to know each of you better, he said, his voice smooth and confident. May the best among you win. Adama listened, her heart heavy with doubt. She didn't belong here, among these beautiful and accomplished girls. She was just a poor orphan, with nothing to offer. When the introductions were over, the king asked each maiden to stand and introduce herself to the group. One by one, the girls stood up, each more elegant and composed than the last. They spoke with confidence, their voices clear and strong as they announced their names and the villages they came from. When it was Ijoma's turn, she stood with a proud smile on her face. I am Ijoma, daughter of Nkechi from this great village of Umunze, she said, her voice filled with pride. I am honored to be here and will do my best to bring glory to my family. When Adama's turn came, she hesitated, her hands trembling slightly. She could feel the weight of Ijoma's glare from across the courtyard, the sharpness of her cousin's gaze cutting through her. Taking a deep breath, Adama stood up, her voice barely above a whisper. My name is Adama. I'm from the village of Achala, but I live with my auntie here in Umunze, she said, keeping her eyes on the ground. I am grateful for this opportunity. The silence that followed her introduction was deafening. Adama quickly sat down, feeling the heat of embarrassment flood her cheeks. She knew she had not made a good impression, and she could almost feel the other girl's eyes boring into her with judgment. After the meeting, the king dismissed the maidens, instructing them to prepare for the days ahead. As the group dispersed, Adama tried to slip away unnoticed, but Ijoma was quick to intercept her. What are you doing here? Ijoma hissed, her eyes flashing with anger. You don't belong in this competition. You are not worthy to be here. Adama looked down, not daring to meet her cousin's furious gaze. I didn't ask to be here, she murmured. The king told me I had to join. Ijoma's face twisted with rage. You should have refused. This is my chance, not yours. You will only embarrass our family. Adama said nothing, knowing that anything she said would only make things worse. She kept her head down and walked away, her heart heavy with the weight of Ijoma's words. Later, Adama found the courage to approach the king and ask for permission to return home to collect her clothes. The king granted her request with a nod. But do not take too long, he warned. The competition will soon begin. Adama promised to be quick and hurried back to Aunt Nkechi's house. When she arrived, her aunt was waiting for her, a scowl on her face. Where have you been? Aunt Nkechi demanded, her voice sharp. Do you know how much work there is to be done? I'm sorry, Auntie, Adama said quietly, keeping her head down. She didn't dare tell her auntie about the king's command. Instead, she quickly gathered a few of her belongings, careful not to draw any more attention to herself. She didn't want to give Auntie Nkechi any reason to suspect that something had changed, that her life might take a different turn after today. She stuffed her clothes into a small bag, her heart pounding in her chest, knowing she would have to sneak back to the palace without raising suspicions. As she turned to leave the room, Auntie Nkechi's sharp voice rang out again. You think you can disappear all day and come back without a word of explanation? Adama froze, clutching the bag tightly. She knew she had to be careful with her words. I'm sorry, Auntie. I lost track of time while I was running the errand for Ijoma. Useless girl! Auntie Nkechi spat, her face contorted with anger. You are just as worthless as your late parent. Wandering around instead of doing the work that needs to be done. Do you think you can waste my time and food while you lazy about? Adama swallowed hard, feeling the stench of her aunt's words like a slap to the face. I'm sorry, Auntie. I will make up for the work, I promise. Auntie Nkechi scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. Get out of my sight before I lose my temper completely. And don't you dare show your face around here if you are not going to be useful. Adama nodded quickly, backing out of the room. She didn't dare to breathe until she was outside and far enough from the house. Her heart raced as she hurried down the path leading back to the palace, her bag clutched tightly in her hands. She didn't dare to look back, afraid that Auntie Nkechi might suddenly appear and drag her back into that life of endless chores and insults. When she reached the palace, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows over the courtyard. Adama slipped inside quietly, hoping to go unnoticed. But as she rounded a corner, she came face to face with Ijoma, who had been pacing near the entrance waiting for her. What are you doing back here? Ijoma demanded, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. You are supposed to be home, not sneaking around the palace like a thief. Adama tried to steady her nerves, keeping her voice calm. I came back to get something I forgot. Liar! Ijoma snapped, her voice filled with venom. You were planning to stay here, weren't you? Don't think I don't know what you are up to, Adama. You think you can just walk into this competition and take what's rightfully mine? Adama kept her eyes on the ground, not daring to meet Ijoma's furious gaze. I'm not trying to take anything from you, Ijoma. I don't even want to be here. Then why are you here? Ijoma's voice rose with each word. Why didn't you go home like you were supposed to? Are you trying to make a fool of me? Adama opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Ijoma's anger boiled over. Get out of my sight. Go crawl back to whatever hole you came from, and don't you dare think you can compete with me. Adama stayed silent, her heart aching from the harsh words. She knew Ijoma's anger was fueled by fear that she might lose the competition, fear that Adama might somehow outshine her. But knowing this didn't make the words hurt any less. Adama turned away from Ijoma, walking quickly towards the room that had been assigned to her. As soon as she entered, she shut the door behind her and leaned against it, taking deep breaths to calm herself. The room was small but comfortable, a far cry from the cramped space she was used to at Auntie Nkechi's house. There was a bed with clean sheets, a small table, and a basin of water for washing. Adama set her bag down on the bed and sat beside it, letting out a long, weary sigh. She had never imagined herself in a place like this, surrounded by luxury, but with every effort, came the bitter reminder that she was still out of place, still unwanted by those around her. Adama felt a tear slip down her cheek, quickly brushing it away. She didn't want to cry. She had to be strong. She was just about to lie down when there was a knock on the door. Adama tensed, fearing it might be Ijoma again. But when she opened the door, she was surprised to see the palace chef, the real Prince Uzo, standing there with a warm smile on his face. "I thought I might find you here," he said, his voice gentle. Adama managed a small smile, grateful for the friendly face. "I didn't think I would see you again so soon." The chef chuckled, stepping into the room. "Well, it seems you have had quite the day. I heard about what happened with the king." Adama nodded, her smile fading. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I just wanted to return Ijoma's phone and go back home." The chef, Prince Uzo, shook his head. "You are not causing any trouble, Adama. The king saw something in you, something that makes you just as worthy as any of the other maidens to be here." "But I don't belong here," Adama said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not like the other girls. I don't have fancy clothes or rich parents or anything." Prince Uzo's eyes softened and he took a seat beside her on the bed. "You have something far more valuable than all of that. You have a good heart, Adama, and a strength that comes from within. Those are things that can't be bought with money or shown off with pretty dresses." Adama looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. For the first time since the day began, she felt a small glimmer of hope. "Do you really think so?" "I do," Prince Uzo said, his smile reassuring. "And you are not alone here. I'll be around if you need a friend. Trust me, you are going to do just fine." Adama felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She nodded, feeling a little more confident. "Thank you for everything." The chef, Prince Uzo, stood up, giving her a final smile. "Rest well tonight, Adama. Tomorrow is a new day, and I have a feeling it's going to be an interesting one." With that, he left the room, leaving Adama alone with her thoughts. She lay down on the bed, feeling the weight of the day slowly lift from her shoulders. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope, to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. As she drifted off to sleep, Adama held onto the kind words of the chef, not knowing that she had just spoken with the prince, who would soon change her life in ways she could never have imagined. The palace courtyard buzzed with activity as the sun peeked over the horizon, bathing Umunze village in a warm golden light. Today was the day the competition would begin in earnest, with the first test that would challenge the maidens in ways they had never been challenged before. The maidens had been given time to prepare, but even with all the practice and study, there was a palpable tension in the air. The first test was divided into 3 parts, each one more demanding than the last. First, there would be a cultural dance, where the maidens would have to showcase their knowledge of traditional dances. This would be followed by a series of questions and answers about the heritage of Umunze, the neighboring village with a rich and ancient history. Finally, the third part would be a general quiz, testing the maidens on their knowledge, not just of their village, but of the wider world. Adama stood on the edge of the courtyard, her heart pounding in her chest. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with thoughts of the test. She knew she wasn't as prepared as the other maidens. They had grown up learning these dances and stories, while she had been busy with chores and surviving the harsh life at Auntie Nkechi's house. But she couldn't let that stop her. She had to try, not just for herself, but for the memory of her parent. As the maidens gathered, some of them began to argue. Nneka, one of the most confident and outspoken maidens, was holding up a brightly colored wrapper, her face flushed with anger. "Who took my wrapper?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "I left it in my room last night and now it's gone." Amara, another maiden, rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. "Maybe you misplaced it," she said dismissively. "It's not like anyone here would want to steal your wrapper. We all have our own." Nneka stepped closer to Amara, her voice low and threatening. "Are you calling me a liar? I know I left it there, and now it's gone. Someone took it, and I won't rest until I find out who." The argument quickly escalated as other maidens joined in, accusing each other of copying styles or taking things that didn't belong to them. The tension was thick, and it seemed like a fight could break out at any moment. Adama watched from the sidelines, feeling out of place among the quarreling maidens. She didn't have a fancy wrapper or jewelry to worry about. She only had the simple clothes she had brought from Auntie Nkechi's house. But as she looked at the other maidens, she felt a pang of worry. She needed something to wear for the dance, something that would make her look like she belonged. As the argument continued, Adama noticed the palace chef, the kind man who had helped her the day before, standing nearby watching the commotion with a concerned expression. She hesitated for a moment, then gathered her courage and approached him. "Excuse me," she said quietly, catching his attention. I don't have anything to wear for the test. Could you help, please?" The chef smiled warmly at her. "Of course, Adama," he said kindly. "Come with me." He led her to a small room in a quiet corner of the palace, where various garments and accessories were kept. "These are some of the clothes left by previous palace visitors," he explained. "You are welcome to choose whatever you need." Adama looked around the room, her eyes wide with wonder. There were so many beautiful things: colorful wrappers, beaded necklaces, and delicate anklets. But she didn't feel right taking something too grand. So she chose a simple yet elegant wrapper with a pattern of delicate flowers. It reminded her of her mother and the story she used to tell. "Thank you," Adama said, her voice full of gratitude. "This is perfect." The chef nodded, his smile never fading. "Remember, Adama, it's not just about what you wear. It's about how you carry yourself. Confidence is the key." Adama nodded, feeling a little more reassured. She left the room with the wrapper in hand, determined to do her best. As she wrapped the clothes around her waist and adjusted it carefully, memories of her mother flooded her mind. She remembered the evenings when her mother would teach her traditional dance steps, guiding her feet with gentle patience. "Always move with the rhythm of your heart, Adama," her mother had said. "The dance is not about the steps, it's about telling our story. Nso, sacred, is our culture, and it lives in every movement you make." Adama closed her eyes, trying to recall the steps her mother had taught her. She could see her mother's graceful movement in her mind, and she began to practice, moving slowly at first, then gradually picking up the pace. The rhythm of the dance flowed through her, and with each step, she felt a little more confident. However, her practice was interrupted by a loud knock on the door. When she opened it, she found Ijoma standing there, her expression full of frustration. "Adama," Ijoma snapped. "Why are you wasting time here? The test is about to start, and you're not even ready. You are going to embarrass us if you don't hurry up." Adama flinched at her cousin's harsh words, but kept her voice calm. "I'm doing my best, Ijoma. I'll be ready in time." Ijoma scoffed. "Your best isn't good enough, Adama. This competition is for people who actually have a chance, not for someone like you." Without waiting for a response, Ijoma turned and stomped off, leaving Adama alone once again. Adama felt a lump in her throat, but she pushed back the tears. She couldn't let Ijoma's words get to her. She had to focus on the test. The courtyard was filled with anticipation as the maidens gathered for the first part of the test. They had all changed into their finest wrappers and adorned themselves with jewelry, their faces painted with intricate designs. Adama felt out of place among them, but she reminded herself of the chef's words, confidence. The first part of the test was the cultural dance. The maidens would each have a chance to showcase their knowledge of traditional dance, moving to the beat of the drums played by the palace musicians. The king and the judges watched from their seats, their expressions serious as they prepared to evaluate the performances. Adama watched as the other maidens took their turns. Some were graceful and skilled, their movements fluid and precise. Others struggled, their steps uncertain as they tried to remember the dance routines they had practiced. Adama could see the tension in their faces, the pressure to perform well weighing heavily on her. When it was Ijoma's turn, she stepped forward confidently, but as the drums began to play, it was clear that something was wrong. Ijoma hesitated, her movements stiff and awkward. She tried to remember the steps, but her frustration was evident as she faltered, her dance lacking the grace she had hoped for. Adama watched with a mixture of sympathy and relief. It was clear that Ijoma was struggling, just as she was. But unlike Ijoma, Adama had something more to rely on, her mother's teachings. When her turn came, Adama took a deep breath and stepped forward. As the drums began to play, Adama closed her eyes and let the rhythm guide her. She moved with the music, her steps light and fluid, just as her mother had taught her. The memories of those lessons filled her with a sense of peace, and she danced as if her mother were right there beside her. The courtyard felt silent as Adama danced, her movement telling the story of her village's heritage. She could feel the eyes of the judges on her, but she didn't let it distract her. She focused on the dance, on the story she was telling with each step. When the dance was over, she stood still for a moment, catching her breath before bowing respectfully to the judges. The king nodded approvingly, and Adama could see a flicker of surprise in his eyes. She had done well, better than she had expected. She returned to her place, feeling a sense of accomplishment that she hadn't felt in a long time. The second part of the test was a quiz about the heritage of Umunze village. The judges asked questions about the customs, traditions, and history of Umunze. The questions were difficult, testing the maidens' knowledge of everything from ancient ceremonies to significant historical events. Adama listened carefully as the questions were asked. She was surprised to find that she knew the answers to some of them, thanks to the story her mother told her. When her tongue came to answer, she spoke confidently, her voice steady as she recalled the details she had learned. The judges seemed impressed, nodding as she gave the correct answers. Ijoma, on the other hand, struggled. She hadn't paid much attention to the lessons she had been given about Umunze's history, and it showed. When the judges asked her a question, she hesitated, unable to come up with an answer. The other maidens whispered among themselves, and Ijoma's face grew red with embarrassment. The final part of the test was a general quiz that tested the maidens' knowledge of the world beyond their village. The questions ranged from geography to current events, covering everything from the names of distant rivers to the traditions of faraway lands. The maidens were given a few moments to think before answering, but the pressure was intense. The judges watched closely, their expressions stern as they took notes on each other's performance. Adama felt her nerves returning as the quiz began. She had never been far from Achala village, and her knowledge of the wider world was limited, but she reminded herself of the chef's words, confidence is the key. She answered the questions as best as she could, drawing on what little she had learned from the few books she had managed to read and the stories her mother had told her when she was a little girl. When it was Ijeoma's turn, she struggled once again. The questions were challenging, and it was clear that Ijeoma hadn't prepared for this part of the test. She stumbled over her answers, her frustration growing with each incorrect response. The other maidens whispered among themselves. As the quiz came to an end, the judges finished their notes and exchanged glances. The maidens were given a moment to relax before dinner was served in the palace dining hall. The first test had been exhausting, and everyone was eager for a chance to rest and eat. The dining hall was grand, with long tables covered in beautiful linings and adorned with fresh flowers. The aroma of delicious food filled the air, and the maidens took their seats, chatting quietly among themselves. Adama felt a little out of place in the opulent surroundings, but she reminded herself to stay calm and focused. The palace chef, still in his disguise as Uzo, the humble cook, entered the hall with a team of kitchen staff, carrying trays of steaming dishes. There were bowls of jollof rice, plates of roasted yam with spicy palm oil sauce, and platters of grilled fish seasoned with herbs. The sight of the food made Adama's stomach growl, and she realized just how hungry she was. As the food was served, the maidens began to eat, their earlier tensions forgotten. But the peace didn't last long. One of the maidens, Chika, who had been boastful throughout the competition, suddenly pushed her plate away with a score. "What is this?" Chika demanded, her voice loud and rude. "This food is tasteless. How dare you serve us something so bland? Do you think we are commoners?" The dining hall fell silent, and all eyes turned to Chika. She glared at the palace chef, who stood nearby with a calm expression. Adama's heart sank as she watched the scene unfold. She knew that speaking to a palace staff member in such a disrespectful manner was unacceptable, and she couldn't believe Chika had been so bold. The chef, still maintaining his composure, stepped forward. "I apologize if the meal is not to your liking," he said politely, though there was a firmness in his voice. "We prepared the dishes with the finest ingredients and the utmost care." Chika sneered, clearly unimpressed. "Care? This food tastes like it was made for pigs. You should be ashamed of yourself for serving this to us." Adama felt a surge of anger on behalf of the chef. She wanted to speak up to defend the man who had been so kind to her, but she knew it wasn't her place. She could only watch as the situation grew more intense. The other maidens shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some of them exchanging uneasy glances. They knew that Chika had crossed a line, but no one dared to say anything. The chef, however, remained calm, his expression unreadable. "I assure you, Miss Chika, that we strive to serve the best," he said, his voice steady. "If there is anything specific you would like, I will do my best to accommodate your request." Chika rolled her eyes and waved her hand dismissively. "Just get out of my sight," she snapped. "You are nothing but a lowly cook." The chef nodded, his face betraying no emotion as he stepped back. Adama noticed, however, that the king and the judges had been observing the entire exchange. They were taking notes, their expressions thoughtful as they recorded everything that had happened during the dinner. It was clear that the judges were not just evaluating the maidens on their performances in the test, but also on their behavior and character. As the dinner continued, the atmosphere in the dining became more subdued. The maidens ate in silence, aware that every action was being watched and noted. Adamma could feel the weight of the competition pressing down on her, but she also felt a sense of resolve. She knew that the judges were looking for more than just skill and knowledge. They were looking for someone with a kind heart and a strong spirit. When the meal was over, the maidens were dismissed to their rooms for the night. As they left the dining hall, Adama noticed the chef watching her. He gave her a small encouraging smile, and she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She knew that he believed in her, and that gave her the strength to keep going. The day had been long and exhausting, but Adama knew that the real challenges were still ahead. The result of the first test would be announced the next day, and she could only hope that her efforts had been enough to keep her in the competition. The next day dawned with a sense of unease hanging over the palace like a heavy mist. It was the day everyone had been waiting for, the day when the result of the first test would be announced. The tension in the air was palpable, and the palace buzzed with anticipation as the maidens tried to prepare themselves for whatever news the day would bring. From the early hours of the morning, whispers could be heard echoing through the corridors. The maidens were anxious, some more than others. They had spent the night replaying the events of the test in their minds, wondering if they had done enough to secure their place in the competition. Some clung to the hope that they had answered the questions well, while others feared the worst. Among the maidens, there were those who were confident in their performance. They strutted through the palace with an air of self-assurance, certain that they would receive high scores. They laughed and joked, sharing their belief that they were safe from elimination. Their confidence was a stark contrast to the fear that gripped others. In the corner of the palace, a small group of mischievous maidens huddled together, their voices low as they discussed a plan that could save them from elimination. One of them had taken the lead in their scheme. She had even gone as far as to approach one of the judges the night before. "Biko, please, if you save me from elimination, I will make it worth your while," she had whispered to him, her voice dripping with desperation. She promised him a night together if he ensured she wouldn't be sent home. The judge, startled by her boldness, had quickly walked away, leaving Nneka to wonder if her plan would work. Elsewhere in the palace, some maidens were filled with sadness and regret. They had not performed well in the test and were unsure of what to expect. They gathered in small groups, their faces clouded with worry. Their hearts pounded in their chests as they tried to imagine what the result would hold. These girls avoided the confident maidens, fearing that their own anxiety would only grow if they had more talk of success. Amid all the tension, Adama found herself in a different place emotionally. She wasn't part of any of the groups, the confident, the anxious, or the mischievous. All she could think about was her life before the competition. The thought of returning to Auntie Nkechi's house, where she had known nothing but hardship and suffering, filled her with dread. Adama didn't care much about winning or losing. She just didn't want to go back to that life. "Chukwu, please, let me stay," she whispered to herself as she walked through the palace, her mind heavy with worry. As the hours passed, the palace chef Uzo moved quietly through the palace, his sharp eyes observing everything. He had noticed how some of the maidens treated each other and how they behaved when they thought no one was watching. Uzo had always believed that a person's true nature was revealed in moments of stress, and today was no exception. Prince Obinna too had been watching closely. He had a unique vantage point, allowing himself to see beyond the maidens' performances and observe their true characters. He saw how they interacted with each other and with the palace staff. King Obidike was also keeping a close eye on the competition. Though he was the king, he was just as interested in the maidens' behavior as in their test scores. He believed that a future queen should possess not only intelligence, but also kindness and humility. Finally, The moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. The maidens were summoned to the grand hall, where the result of the first test would be announced. As they gathered, the room fell silent. The air was thick with anticipation, and the maidens' hearts raced in their chest. The head judge, a tall man with a serious expression, stood at the front of the room, holding a scroll in his hand. The scroll contained the scores and the names of those who would move on to the next round. The judge's voice echoed through the hall as he began to speak. The results of the first test are now ready to be announced. Each of you did your best, but only some will move forward. I will now read the scores and announce who will be leaving the competition. The maidens held their breath as the judge began to call out names. He started with those who had received the highest scores. Relief washed over some as their names were called. Their scores high enough to keep them in the competition. Their faces lit up with joy, and they exchanged smiles and congratulatory whispers. Others, however, remained silent, their names still unspoken. Fear gnawed at them as the list of names dwindled. Adama stood quietly, her hands clasped tightly together. Her heart pounded in her chest as she waited for the judge to finish reading the names. She prayed silently, hoping that her name would be called before it was too late. When the judge reached the end of the list, he paused, letting the suspense build. The maiden who will be leaving the competition is Chika, he finally announced, his voice firm. A murmur spread through the room as the maidens turned to look at Chika. The girl's face crumbled in shock and disbelief. She had not only struggled with the questions, but had also been rude to the palace staff and chefs. Her behavior had sealed her fate. No, please, Chika cried, stepping forward, but the judge shook his head. The decision is final. You must leave the palace at once. With a heavy heart, Chika walked out of the hall, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The remaining maidens watched her go. Their relief mingled with fear. They had been spared this time, but they knew the competition would only get tougher. Once Chika left, the judge cleared his throat and addressed the remaining maidens. The next test would take place in 2 days. It would be a cooking test. Each of you will prepare your best meal, which should be served to the king, the prince, and the judges. The maiden who prepares the most delicious dish will have the opportunity to speak with the prince directly. Excited, murmurs spread through the room. The idea of a cooking test thrilled many of the maidens. They eagerly anticipated the chance to showcase their culinary skills and the possibility of speaking to the prince personally. Each girl had her own reasons for wanting this opportunity. Some were driven by ambition, while others hoped to win the prince's heart. Adama felt a flicker of hope. Cooking was something she was familiar with. Thanks to her mother's teachings, the thought of preparing a meal that could impress the king and prince filled her with determination. She was excited about the cooking test, even though she knew the competition would be fierce. Her mother's lessons in the kitchen were her strength, and she hoped they would give her an advantage. As the maidens left the grand hall, they went to their rooms to prepare for the next test. Some girls immediately called family members and friends, seeking advice on what dish to prepare. They wanted to ensure their recipe would stand out. Ijoma in particular was worried about her cooking skills. She wasn't as experienced as others, and she sought help from anyone who could offer it. Meanwhile, some maidens were scheming. They whispered in dark corners about ways to sabotage their rivals. A few even bribed the palace gatekeeper to let them sneak out to visit herbalists. They hoped to obtain charms that would make their dishes irresistible to the king and prince. They were determined to win at any cost, even if it meant using underhanded tactics. Adama, on the other hand, was focused on her preparations. Cooking was second nature to her, thanks to her mother's careful instruction. She spent the evening planning her dish: a rice, savory ofe nsala, white soup with fresh catfish and pounded yam. A traditional meal that was both hearty and comforting. She remembered the way her mother used to make it, the way she would carefully blend the ingredients, and the patience it took to get the flavors just right. Adama's mind was set on recreating that same magic in her dish. The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity. The palace was alive with the sounds of the maidens practicing their cooking, gathering ingredients, and discussing their plans. Some of the girls were frantic, especially those who weren't confident in their culinary skills. Ijoma was among them, pacing back and forth in her room, chewing her lip nervously. She had begged a friend to teach her how to cook a simple dish, but even then, she wasn't sure she could pull it off. The day of the cooking test finally arrived. The maidens were up early, each of them trying to calm their nerves as they prepared to enter the palace kitchens. The large, spacious kitchen was bustling with activity as the girls gathered around their designated cooking stations. Each station had the maiden's name marked clearly on it, along with the pots and utensils they would use. Adama found her station and took a deep breath. She was ready. She had spent the last 2 days going over every detail in her mind, remembering her mother's words and the care she put into her cooking. "This is for you, nne," she thought, her heart swelling with determination. As the girls began to cook, the kitchen filled with the mouth-watering aromas of various dishes being prepared. Some maidens moved quickly, trying to finish as fast as possible, while others took their time, ensuring every step was perfect. The tension in the kitchen was thick, and the maidens glanced at each other nervously as they worked, each one hoping to outdo the others. Adama was fully immersed in her task, her hands moving skillfully as she prepared her dish. She ground the fresh uziza seeds and crayfish, added them carefully to the pot, and watched as the broth simmered to perfection. She could almost see her mother standing beside her, guiding her with every step. The memory filled her with warmth, and she knew she was doing everything just right. But not everyone was so focused. As Adama's dish neared completion, Ijoma, who was cooking at the station next to hers, kept casting furtive glances at Adama's pot. Ijoma's own dish was not coming together as she had hoped, and panic was starting to set in. Her mind raced as she tried to think of a way to save herself from failure, and then a devious idea crossed her mind. When Adama wasn't looking, Ijoma quickly switched their pots, replacing Adama's dish with her own. She also swapped the name tags on their stations, hoping that Adama would be the one to present the poorly made dish to the king and the prince. A sly smile curled on Ijoma's lips as she hurriedly returned to her station, satisfied with her plan. Unknown to her, however, the palace chef Uzo had witnessed everything, hidden in the shadows. He had been keeping an eye on the maidens, and he saw Ijoma's sneaky move. Without hesitation, Uzo waited for the right moment, and when the maidens were called to present their dishes in the dining hall, he quietly switched the pots back to their original places, making sure that Adama's dish would be the one presented under her name. The maidens gathered in the palace dining room, their hearts pounding with anxiety as they prepared to serve their dishes to the king, the prince, and the judges. The grand dining table was set with fine silverware, and the aroma of the various dishes filled the air, making everyone's mouth water. One by one, the maidens presented their dishes to the king, who sat at the head of the table, and the prince, who was seated next to him. The judges tasted each dish, taking their time to evaluate the flavors and presentation. The room was silent, the tension almost unbearable, as the maidens waited for the verdict. When it was finally Adama's turn, she stepped forward, her heart in her throat. She placed her pot of Orphan salad and pounded yam on the table, her hands trembling as she removed the lid to reveal the steamy, fragrant soup. The king leaned forward, inhaling the rich aroma with a pleased expression. Prince Obinna watched closely, his curiosity piqued. The king took a spoonful of the soup, tasting it slowly, while the judges sampled the pounded yam and the tender piece of fish. As they ate, a look of delight spread across their faces. The king nodded approvingly, and the prince smiled, clearly impressed. "This is delicious," the king declared, his voice warm with satisfaction. "Whoever made this dish has true talent." Adama's heart soared at the king's praise. She had done it. She had impressed the king and the prince with her cooking. She couldn't help but smile, her eyes shining with happiness. After all the dishes had been tasted, the judges conferred quietly among themselves before turning back to the maidens. The head judge cleared his throat, signaling that the results were about to be announced. The room fell silent as everyone waited with bated breath. The winner of the cooking test, whose dish was the most flavorful and well prepared, is Adama, the judge announced, his voice ringing through the hall. A gasp of surprise rippled through the room, followed by murmurs of admiration. Adama could hardly believe her ears. She had won. The joy she felt was overwhelming, and she could hardly keep the smile from her face. The other maidens looked at her with a mixture of envy and respect, while Ijoma's face twisted in disbelief and anger. She couldn't understand how Adama had managed to win after she had switched their dishes. As a reward for her victory, Adama was given the opportunity to speak directly to Prince Obinna. She stepped forward, her heart fluttering as she approached the prince. He smiled warmly at her, his eyes filled with genuine admiration. "Your cooking is extraordinary, Adama," he said, his voice gentle. "You must be very proud of yourself." "Thank you, my prince," Adama replied, her voice soft but steady. She was filled with gratitude and a sense of accomplishment that she had never felt before. After the announcement, the maidens who had performed poorly in the cooking were eliminated. Some of them accepted their fate with grace, while others left the palace bitter and disappointed. A few maidens even chose to withdraw from the competition, realizing that they could not handle the pressure. The competition was proving to be more challenging than they had anticipated, and not everyone was cut out for it. As the day drew to a close, the remaining maidens retired to their rooms, each one reflecting on the day's events. Some were happy, others were sad, and a few were plotting their next move. Ijoma in particular was sitting with anger. Her plan had failed miserably, and she couldn't understand how Adama's dish had been chosen over hers. Her hatred for Adama deepened, and she vowed to find another way to bring her down. Meanwhile, Adama was heading back to her room when she noticed the palace chef Uzo waiting for her in the corridor. He had a knowing smile on his face, and as she approached, he gestured for her to stop. "Adama," he said, his voice low but kind. "I have something to tell you." Adama looked at him curiously, her brow furrowed with confusion. "What is it, Chef Uzo?" she asked. Uzo glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in closer. "I saw what your cousin Ijoma did in the kitchen," he began. "She switched your dish with hers, hoping to ruin your chance. But don't worry, I switched them back before anyone noticed." Adama's eyes widened with shock and disbelief. She did that?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and sadness. Uzo nodded, his expression serious. "Yes, she did. But I wasn't about to let her get away with it. You deserve the recognition we received today, Adama. Your cooking was the best, and that's why you won." Tears welled up in Adama's eyes as she realized the extent of Ijoma's treachery. But more than that, she was filled with gratitude for Uzo's kindness and honesty. "Thank you, Chef Uzo," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for helping me." Uzo smiled gently at her. "You're welcome, Adama. Just keep being yourself and don't let anyone bring you down. You are stronger than you know." Adama returned to her room, her mind swelling with thoughts of the day's event. She was both elated and troubled. The joy of winning the cooking test and receiving praise from the king and the prince was tempered by the knowledge of Ijoma's betrayal. As she lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, Adama replayed the scene in the kitchen over and over in her mind. The image of Ijoma switching their dishes filled her with a deep sadness, but she was determined not to let it break her spirit. Despite the hurt, Adama found comfort in the kindness of Chef Uzo. His support and encouragement meant more to her than words could explain. She realized that there were people in the palace who believed in her, and that gave her the strength to face whatever lay ahead. As the night wore on, Adama finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams a mixture of memories and hopes for the future. She dreamed of her mother, of the village of Achala, and of a life where she was free from the burdens of her past. In her dream, she was standing on a hill, looking out over the village, and she could hear the distant sounds of drums and singing, sounds of celebrating and joy. It was a vision of a future where she had overcome all the challenges before her, where she was strong, happy, and at peace. When morning came, Adama woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The next test was looming, and she knew she had to be ready. She pushed thoughts of Ijoma's betrayal to the back of her mind and focused on what was to come. Adama knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but she was determined to face it with courage and determination. As she prepared for the day, she couldn't help but think of her mother's words, the advice she had given her so many times. Those words echoed in her heart, guiding her as she dressed and headed to the palace courtyard, where the next challenge awaited. The other maidens were already gathered, their faces a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Adama joined them, her posture straight and her expression calm. She knew that the eyes of the palace were on them, and she wanted to make her mother proud. As the day's event unfolded, Adama kept her focus on the task at hand. The challenges were growing more difficult, and the competition was fierce, but she was determined to give her best. She knew that she could not afford to let her guard down, not even for a moment. But as the day drew to a close, and the maidens were once again gathered in the palace hall, Adama realized something important. She had come this far not just because of her skills or determination, but because of the support and kindness of those around her. From Chef Uzo's timely intervention to the memory of her mother's guidance, Adama understood that she was not alone in this journey. With the realization came a deep sense of peace. Adama knew that no matter what happened next, she would face it with grace and strength. And as she looked around at other maidens, some of whom were her rivals, she felt a sense of compassion for them as well. They were all on their own journeys, each facing their own challenges and fears. As the evening came to an end and the maidens were dismissed for the night, Adama walked back to her room with a light heart. She was ready for whatever the next day would bring. And as she closed her eyes to sleep, she whispered a prayer of gratitude for the strength to endure, for the kindness of others, and for the love of her mother that continued to guide her. The night was quiet, and in the stillness, Adama dreamed once more. This time, her dreams were filled with the sounds of laughter and the warmth of the sun. She dreamed of a future where she had overcome all the obstacles in her path, where she stood tall and proud, surrounded by those who loved and believed in her. And so, with the rising sun, Adama prepared to continue her journey, her heart filled with hope and determination, ready to embrace whatever the future held. The day of the final test arrived with a sense of anticipation that hung thick in the air. The maidens were gathered in the grand hall of the palace, their heart pounding in their chest. They had faced many challenges in this competition, but this one was different. It was a test of intelligence and deep thinking, one that would reveal the sharpest mind among them. The chief judge stood before the maidens, holding a small, intricately carved box. Inside the box was a scroll, and on that scroll was written the ancient riddle that had been used in the village of Umunze for generations to test the wisdom of its people. As the judge opened the box and unrolled the scroll, the room fell silent. The maidens leaned forward, eager to hear the riddle that would determine their fate. This riddle, the judge began, his voice deep and steady, is one that has puzzled many before you. It is said that only those with a truly sharp mind and a deep understanding of the world can solve it. Listen carefully. He paused, letting the tension build, then continued. I speak without a mouth and hear without ears. I have no body, but I come alive with wind. What am I? The maidens exchanged puzzled glances, each one deep in thought. It was a difficult riddle, one that required them to think beyond the obvious. They knew the answer was not something they could simply guess. It required careful consideration and insight. Adama stood up quietly, her brow furrowed as she thought about the riddle. She knew this was the final test, the one that would determine who was truly worthy of becoming the prince's bride. She replayed the riddle in her mind, thinking about each word carefully. I speak without a mouth, hear without ears. Nobody but come alive with wind, she murmured to herself. The other maidens began to whisper among themselves, trying to come up with an answer. Some suggested it might be a spirit. Others thought it was an echo, but none of their answers felt right. Adama, however, continued, her mind turning over the possibilities. Suddenly, it hit her. The answer was so simple, yet so profound. An echo, she whispered, a smile spreading across her face. It's an echo. When the judge asked for their answers, the maidens hesitated, unsure of themselves, but Adama, with the confidence shining in her eyes, stepped forward. The answer is an echo, she said, her voice clear and sure. The judge smiled, a look of approval in his eyes. You are correct, Adama, he said. An echo is the answer. You have shown great wisdom and intelligence. The other maidens looked at Adama with a mix of admiration and envy. She had done it again, solved the riddle that had stumped them all. Ijoma in particular felt a surge of anger and frustration. How could Adama always come out on top? The next day, the maidens were called to the palace once more, this time to hear the final announcement. The grand hall was filled with people of Umunze village, all eager to see who would be chosen as the prince's bride. The king sat on his throne, with Prince Obina by his side. The real Prince Uzo stood quietly in the background, waiting for the moment to reveal the truth. The chief judge stepped forward, holding the scroll that contained the results of the competition. After many tests and challenges, the time has come to announce the winner, he began. The maiden, who has shown the most virtue, intelligence, and grace will be chosen as the bride of the prince. The tension in the room was palpable as the judge unrolled the scroll. The winner of this competition, he announced, is Adama. The room erupted in applause and cheers as Adama stepped forward, her heart swelling with joy. She had done it. She had won. But as she stood before the king, she couldn't help but notice that Prince Obinna, the man she thought was the prince, was smiling at her with a twinkle in his eyes. Before she could say anything, the king rose from his throne, his expression serious but kind. "People of Umunze," he began, his voice carrying across the room, "there is something you all must know. The man you have seen as the prince throughout this competition is not the true prince." A gasp of shock rippled through the crowd, and the maidens exchanged confused and anxious glances. Adama felt her heart skip a beat. What was the king talking about? The king turned to Prince Obinna, who stepped forward with a smile. "The man you know as Prince," the king continued, "is actually Obinna, a close friend of the true prince. The real prince has been among you all along, disguised as someone else to observe your true nature." The crowd was silent, every eye fixed on the king. "The true prince of Umunze," the king said, "is none other than Prince Uzo, the man you have known as the palace chef." The room erupted in shocked murmurs, and several maidens gasped in disbelief. Some of them even fainted, overwhelmed by the revelation. They thought that they had treated the palace chef so poorly. Not knowing he was the prince filled them with regret and shame. Ijoma in particular felt her heart sink. She had been so cruel to Uzo, thinking he was just a lowly chef. Now she realized her mistake, and the regret was almost too much to bear. Prince Uzo stepped forward, his disguise removed, and smiled at the crowd. "I wanted to see the true characters of the maidens," he explained. "I wanted to know who would treat others with kindness, even when they thought no one important was watching. Adama was the only one who showed true virtue, treating everyone with respect and compassion. That is why I have chosen her to be my bride." The crowd erupted in applause once more, and Adama felt tears of joy welling up in her eyes. She couldn't believe it. She was going to be the queen of Umunze. Prince Uzo turned to his friend Obinna and clasped his hand. "Thank you, my friend, for playing the part so well," he said with a grateful smile. "You have been a true friend, and I couldn't have done this without you." Obinna smiled, clapping Uzo on the shoulder. "It was my honor, Uzo," he replied. "I'm glad we found the right person for you." The preparations for the wedding began, and the entire village of Umunze was abuzz with excitement. The palace was decorated with beautiful flowers and colorful fabrics, and the sounds of drums and flutes filled the air. It was a celebration like no other, with everyone eager to witness the union of Prince Uzo and Adama. Auntie Nkechi and Ijoma, however, were filled with regret. Nkechi couldn't believe how she had treated Adama all these years, never imagining that her niece would one day become a queen. Ijoma was equally devastated. She had spent so much time trying to bring Adama down, only to see her rise higher than she ever could have imagined. On the day of the wedding, Adama was dressed in the finest clothes the village had to offer. She wore a beautiful gele hetai of bright colors and a wrapper that shimmered in the sunlight. Her face was adorned with beads, and she looked every bit the queen she was about to become. As she walked down the aisle, her heart swelled with pride and happiness. She had come so far from the little girl who had been mistreated and overlooked. Now, she was about to marry the prince and become the queen of Umunze. It was a dream come true. The wedding ceremony was beautiful, filled with the rich traditions of the village. The elders blessed the couple, and the people sang and danced in celebration. When it was time for the vows, Prince Uzo took Adama's hands in his and looked into her eyes with a love that made her heart skip a beat. Adama, he said, his voice filled with emotion. From the moment I met you, I knew you were special. You have shown kindness, intelligence, and strength in everything you do. I am honored to have you as my wife and my queen. Adama smiled, tears of joy in her eyes. Uzo, she replied, her voice steady. I promise to stand by your side, to love you, and to be the best queen I can be. I am so grateful for this opportunity, and I will cherish it always. The ceremony ended with a grand feast, where the villagers and the royal family celebrated late into the night. Adama was the center of attention, and everyone admired her grace and beauty. Even Auntie Nkechi and Ijoma couldn't help but feel a twinge of pride, despite their regret. As the new queen of Umunze, Adama quickly took her duties. Her first successful act as queen was to establish a school for the children of the village, ensuring that every child, no matter their background, would have the opportunity to learn and grow. The villagers were amazed at her wisdom and generosity, and they knew that they were in good hands with Adama as their queen. Adama School became a place where the children of Umuze learned not only how to read and write, but also about their rich heritage and traditions. She made sure that the teachers were kind and patient, just as she would have wanted when she was a child. The school became a beacon of hope for the village, a place where every child could learn and dare to dream better. Auntie Nkechi, who had once mistreated Adama so harshly, couldn't help but feel ashamed of her past actions. She had lost her chance to make things right, and now she could only watch as Adama blossomed into a queen beloved by all. Ijoma too realized how wrong she had been. Seeing Adama's success and the love the villagers had for her, she knew she had wasted her time on jealousy and hatred. One day, as Adama was visiting the school she had founded, she noticed a little girl standing alone in the corner of the playground. The girl looked shy and unsure of herself, reminding Adama of her own younger self. Adama approached the girl with a warm smile and asked her name. My name is Chizoba, the girl whispered, her eyes wide with admiration as she looked up at the queen. Chizoba, that's a beautiful name. Do you like school, Chizoba? The little girl nodded, but Adama could see that something was troubling her. She knelt down to be at eye level with the child and spoke softly. Is something wrong, my dear? Chizoba hesitated for a moment before speaking. I don't have any friends, she admitted quietly. Adama's heart went out to the girl. She understood how lonely it could be to feel different or left out. You know, Chizoba, she said, when I was your age, I didn't have many friends either. But I learned that sometimes it just takes one kind person to make a difference. Would you like me to help you find a friend? The little girl's eyes lit up with hope as she nodded eagerly. Adama took her hand and together they walked around the playground, finding a group of children who were playing a game. Adama introduced Chizoba to the group, and before long, she was laughing and playing with the other children. As Adama watched Chizoba's smile grow, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She knew that this was what being a queen was all about, helping others, making a difference, and spreading kindness wherever she went. That night, after a long day of fulfilling her duties as queen, Adama returned to the palace. Prince Uzo was waiting for her in the royal garden, a peaceful spot where they often spent time together. The moonlight bathed the garden in a soft glow, and the scent of blooming flowers filled the air. How was your day, my queen? Uzo asked as he took her hand. It was wonderful, Adama replied with a contented smile. I met a little girl today who reminded me so much of myself when I was young. It made me realize how far I have come and how important it is to use our blessings to help others. Uzo smiled at his wife, his heart filled with pride. You are doing an amazing job, Adama. The people of Umunze are so lucky to have you as their queen, and I am so lucky to have you as my wife. Adama leaned into his embrace, feeling the warmth of his love surrounded her. And I am lucky to have you, Uzo. Together, we can make Umunze a place where everyone can thrive. As they stood there in the garden, the stars twinkling above them, Adama felt a deep sense of peace. She had found her place in the world, a place where she was loved and respected, where she could make a real difference. Her journey from the little girl who had lost everything to the queen of Umunze was complete. She had faced many challenges, but through it all, she had remained true to herself and her values. And now, as she looked to the future, she knew that she and Uzo would continue to build a life filled with love, hope, and endless possibilities. And so, the story of Adama, the orphaned girl who became a queen, came to a beautiful and joyful end. She had faced her trials with courage and grace, and in the end, she found the happiness and love she so richly deserved. Umunze flourished under her rule, and her legacy of kindness and wisdom would be remembered for generations to come. Ogucha, the end. The story of Adama teaches us that kindness and being true to yourself are very important. Even when Adama was treated badly, she remained kind and respectful to everyone. This showed that she had a good heart. In the end, it was her kindness and intelligence that made her the queen. The story reminds us that it doesn't matter where you come from or what others think of you. What matters is how you treat others and stay true to who you are. Good things happen to those who are kind, patient, and wise. Thank you so much for watching this amazing story about Adama, the orphan girl who later became the queen of Umunze kingdom. If you liked it and felt inspired with her journey, please show your support by clicking the like button, sharing with your friends, and leaving a comment below. To see more interesting stories and learn about different cultures, subscribe to African Stories and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means a lot and helps us bring more stories to you. Until we meet again, stay connected, stay inspired, and keep smiling.